The Nazis were the most terrifying enemies in one of the nastiest wars in history. But taking them on wasn't just down to men like him. Britain fought the Second World War with a bunch of ordinary office workers, grocers, bakers and housewives. We know the result, but what was it really like for ordinary Britons caught up in it all? Most of the people who still remember the Second World War were only children at the time, but even though they were just kids, a lot of them still have vivid memories of having to seek shelter because their country was under brutal attack. In 1940, 8-year-old Babs Clark and her family found themselves in the thick of it all in London's East End. So what did Babs's mum do? She grabbed the kids and headed for the countryside. Thousands of parents had the same idea. Nearly 1 million schoolchildren were packed off to the country. Babs and her mum and sister Jean ended up in Torquay. It was amazing. They had a small cottage on a farm and went to a local school. Best of all, they could play on the beach every day, safe from the bombs. Or so they thought. Babs, now in her 80s, still remembers one particular incident like it was yesterday.
There was a couple of planes coming in from the sea, and I was saying to my sister, I wonder what they are, Jean. And it was two Messerschmitts. And they machine gunned the beach we were on. Because we came home full of it, telling my mum, and I won't say the actual words my mum said, but in other words, it was so-and-so that for a game of soldiers. We're going back to London. I'd rather have the bombs coming down than the bloody Germans machine gunning my kids.
Babs and her mum and sister hot-footed it back to the family home in Bethnal Green. Which was yours?
This one.
So when you got back to London, what was your house like?
It was all right, apart from the fact we had to have a tarpaulin over the roof. Because the roof had got blown off during the Blitz.
And you still live there?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course you did.
The family's unscheduled break in Torquay may well have saved their lives. And after Hitler had had his way with the East End, it was even more fun than the beach. If, well, a little dangerous. More of a problem for growing kids was food. The government was keen to make sure nothing got wasted. To make sure Britain didn't run out, the amount of food everybody could eat was rationed, and every time you wanted to buy something, you got a stamp in this, your ration book. For Bab's mum, it was a right old drag. Stuff this for a game of soldiers. And provided for only a limited menu. This is what Babs would have been allowed in her rations. A couple of pints of milk, some sugar, a little bit of cheese, some jam, some marge, some lard, 1 egg and some egg powder, this much meat and a few sweets. It would make a lovely meal, wouldn't it? But it had to last Babs a whole week. The government was full of useful advice on how to make everything go further. But there was one thing that wasn't in short supply for Babs and her family: greens.
We hate spinach.
We had our allotment and we grew a lot of veg, and our allotment was in there. My dad used to be quite proud of that allotment, what things he grew. Yeah.
What did your mum make you?
Stew. We used to have a lot of stews.
After tea, as night fell, Babs and her mum and sister would head down to the newly built Bethnal Green tube station. EastEnders depended on the underground as the best place to hide from Hitler's bombs.
My mum got a bunk down here for us.
A bunk?
Yeah, it was a three-tier bunk. Bottom, middle and top.
There was loads of space because the rails hadn't yet been laid in the new station. But it's surprising the bunks didn't collapse. They'd been assembled by Boy Scouts from a flat pack. How far down that tunnel did you used to sleep?
I wouldn't like to say how many yards, but it was a good 10, 15-minute walk. It was quite a way down.
You didn't feel claustrophobic?
No, no. I mean, you had the bunks either side and the walkway in the middle, and I think it's because we knew so many people. My mum had stopped and talked to them, and you got to your bunk in the end.
What did you do if you wanted to pee?
Go in the bucket.
The bucket?
Yeah, they had buckets. They're so far along.
Yeah.
With a curtain round it. Very smelly. Oh.
Apart from the smell, it all sounds rather jolly. It was like an underground town with a library, doctor's surgery, and a hall for weddings or parties. Every time a soldier came home, they had a jolly shindig. Did you feel safe here?
Yeah. But there again, you see, I had my mum and my sisters, so I felt safe because I was with them.
I wonder if you left anything down there.
Bit of chewing gum. I
think
stuck
so?
it on one of the walls.
Could still be there, couldn't
I reckon it still is there, yeah.
But the fun was about to come to a juddering halt as once again the realities of war hit home. On the 3rd of March 1943, an incident took place at Bethnal Green, which in moments became a major tragedy. Coming up, disaster in the underground, and Babs's family are caught up in the panic and turmoil.
There were so many people down the stairs, they were all falling on top of them.
In London's East End during the Second World War, people like 8-year-old Babs Clark depended on the London Underground for their survival. But one evening in 1943, something truly tragic happened at Bethnal Green Tube. It was a rainy night. The air raid siren went off at 8:17. People started coming down into the tube as they always did. But at that moment, anti-aircraft guns began to start firing in Victoria Park, just over the road there. So more and more people came down, and it was very dark. They only got one light because of the blackout, and there weren't handrails here then like there are now, and all the steps were really slippy, and a woman tripped over with her son, and some old chap fell on top of them, and more people kept pressing down until they were right up to the ceiling, crushing each other. Although Babs survived, many didn't. A memorial next to Bethnal Green Tube Station, erected surprisingly recently in 2017, marks the worst British civilian disaster in World War II. 173 people were crushed to death. What do you remember about that night?
I know I got pushed and I fell over something, and somebody fell on me. There were so many people down the stairs, they were all falling on top of them. And I just heard my sister saying, "Oh, don't pull me out yet, I've got my little sister here." And with that, whoever it was pulled the pair of us out. Didn't know what had happened to my mum. And my sister was going round asking if people had seen anything of our mum, which they hadn't. And then an air raid warden said to her, "Go in that room, she might be in there." Jean went in there, and it was all dead bodies she had to look at to see if our mum was there.
Luckily, Babs' mum had survived. And the next day, life went on as usual.
She still got us up the next morning for me to go to school. And the headmaster was in assembly, and he said there's been a bad accident at Bethnal Green Tube Station. And he said, any of you children that were in it, you can go home for the day. Well, after school come home with us, they all marched out.
Did you ever use that shelter again, or was it closed down?
Oh, no, we used it the following night.
Babs and her family just kept calm and carried on. The German bombing campaign deliberately set out to undermine our morale. But talking to Babs, I get a real sense of the conviction and determination that was shared by almost everyone. And I reckon it was that, as much as anything, that got us through.